Hello, my name's Julian Edgar, and I'm the author of a whole bunch of books on car modification, modifying the aerodynamics of your road car, setting up a home car workshop, optimizing car performance modifications. I've been writing about cars, I've been modifying cars, I've been involved in car workshops, watching what they're doing. I've also seen major car manufacturing engineering workshops. I've read numerous Society of Automotive Engineering papers. I've been immersed in this topic for many, many years. And what I want to do today is talk about improving your car's mileage, improving your car's fuel economy. And I want to get rid of a lot of the rubbish I hear people talking. People write to me, oh, will this work? I want to get a 20% improvement in mileage. The answer almost always is no, it won't work. Let's have a look at what will work. Let's have a look at some of the rubbish that gets spread around. Now, the first thing I want to say, and a lot of people don't seem to realize this, is that improving mileage is far harder than gaining extra performance. If you want extra performance from an internal combustion engine, all you have to do is to force more air into it and add an appropriate amount of fuel. And it really is that simple. Turbocharging, supercharging, different camshafts, different intake systems, different exhausts. They're really always just about pushing more air into the engine and then adding appropriate fuel and ignition timing. But improving mileage is nothing like that, because you have to improve the efficiency of the car as a whole. You have to get more energy out of the fuel, and that energy needs to be turned into forward movement in a more efficient manner than the manufacturer actually achieved. And when we talk about manufacturers, they actually have a really good idea of what they're doing. If you go to a manufacturer's dyno facility and you see what they're doing, you go to their emissions testing laboratory, you see what they're doing, you read some of the technical literature produced by car manufacturers, they know more about making cars and engineering cars than anyone else in the world. Now that might seem the absolute bleeding obvious, but I get so many people writing to me and they'll say things like, oh, of course the car manufacturer is not interested in fuel economy, or they don't know what they're doing. And my jaw just drops open. This is just crazy stuff. Car manufacturers actually want to produce cars that have the very best mileage, the very best fuel economy. And that's been the case for at least 20 years, if not far longer. Why? Well, they want the lowest emissions, and normally the amount of emissions is pretty closely correlated to the amount of fuel you're burning, and they want to be able to advertise, our cars are efficient, our cars get this mileage. Now, it doesn't mean every car they sell in the whole range is going to be incredible for fuel mileage, but it does mean that they're always looking at that as one aspect of the design. And so the idea that someone working at home can just dream up a little tweak and that will improve the car's mileage by a massive amount is just invariably rubbish. It just doesn't happen. That doesn't mean you can't improve a car's mileage, but it's always a much greater task than many of the people who write to me actually believe. It's as I said, it's harder than actually making the car go harder. So, to improve power is easy compared with improving mileage, and so it always is going to be fairly involved. Something, again, unfortunately, that people don't really want to get engaged with. Now, no doubt, I reckon 80% of the people watching this video will by now have turned off Too Many Home Truths. But if you really do want to see how to improve mileage, fuel economy, let's have a look. There are 4 areas that you can change. You can modify the engine. You can reduce aerodynamic drag. You can reduce rolling resistance, or you can change the driving style of the person who is steering the car. They're the only 4 ways. And each of those, as I'm implying, is quite involved. Let's just take a quick overview of each. With the engine, you can reduce pumping losses. Pumping losses are the losses caused by the air actually having to be pumped in and out of the engine, having to be drawn in by producing a pressure lower than atmospheric, unless it's a turbocharged or supercharged engine, and then pushing that air all the way out through the valves and exhausts. So intake system modification, you can change the resonant tuning of the intake system so that in fact it improves what's called the volumetric efficiency, how much air the engine's actually breathing. Unfortunately, manufacturers have been doing an incredible job of improving intake systems over the last 10 or 20 years with variable intake systems with multiple resonant tuned paths, effectively variable length intakes and so on. I don't think I've ever seen anyone produce an aftermarket intake system that actually improves volumetric efficiency at peak torque, because the manufacturers are so good at doing that. But good luck. Exhaust. This is one where you typically can get an improvement in reducing pumping losses if you're prepared to put up with a bit more noise and pay a bit more money for the exhaust. So going up in diameter, less pressure drop through the exhaust, a bigger cat converter, bigger mufflers, that is a specific distinct area where you probably will be able to improve fuel economy, mileage. EGR, exhaust gas recirculation. In engines that run a throttle body, a throttle butterfly, because you're operating so often with that throttle nearly closed, you're trying to draw air, the engine's trying to draw air past that nearly closed throttle. If you can open exhaust gas recirculation and just have that exhaust gas going round and round, rather than having new material having to be pulled in all the time, you can see a very small gain in fuel economy, mileage, but you can get it. And the trick is you modify the EGR so you're running at the highest amount that you can before the engine starts to stumble or run badly. If it's electronically controlled EGR, then that makes it one step easier. A bit leaner air-fuel ratios. Stoichiometric 14.7 to 1 is the standard air-fuel ratio that most cars run at, most port-injected cars. What if you go leaner, especially in cruise? Now you can do this, and why didn't the manufacturer do it? Because they're going to be not then passing emissions legislation, but if you're not worried about emissions in cruise, you can go leaner. How much leaner can you go? Most cars 16.5, 17 to 1. Some very special cars that have been designed to run in lean cruise from the factory, they've got a lot of turbulence in their combustion chambers, can run as high as 24 to 1, but that is extremely unlikely for a typical car. Do you save fuel? Yes, you can. Does it reduce drivability? Not if you do it very, very carefully. Now, doing it properly is not going to involve a few tweaks to a few sensors. It's going to involve programmable engine management, or it's going to involve getting right into the software of the original engine management system, using a package that's been designed specifically to allow you to do that, and making some very careful changes. When people write to me, I say, go to a workshop that's got the software that allows them to modify your factory engine management system of the car. They've got to have a good dyno, and they've got to have a good operator, and then they should be able to improve your fuel economy, your mileage. What about the design of the engine? Well, increasing compression ratio will make the engine more efficient. It'll make more power come from a given amount of fuel. Obviously, that requires the engine to be pulled apart, different pistons to be put in, perhaps the head machined and so on. And especially if you are running high octane fuel, and especially if you can advance the ignition timing as appropriate. If you go too high in compression, you might have to pull the timing back. Or it may cope with more advance, then you'll achieve more energy from a given amount of fuel. Valve timing, new camshaft, changing the timing of the original camshaft or camshafts to improve volumetric efficiency. In other words, moving the peak torque down in RPM to the area where you are more often. You'll lose in top end power. Your car will not go as hard if you're reading it to the rev line, but if you're just interested in fuel economy, you can usually pull that torque peak down a little bit, and then you'll be at peak volumetric efficiency more frequently in your normal cruise. Now, none of those, except perhaps for the exhaust, are easy. None of those are cheap, and some of those will cost you far, far more than you'll save in fuel in the life of the car, but it's not easy, as I keep saying. What about aerodynamic drag? Well, you can reduce total drag in two different ways, and the more time you're spending on a highway at higher speeds, the more important this will be. If you spend all your times in the city, this will still register, but it will be much less important. You can reduce the drag coefficient, how slippery the car actually is. A lower drag coefficient means lower total drag. And how do you do that? An under tray, a full length under tray, is one of the best ways of reducing total drag, so CD. Or you can reduce the size of the wake, the area of disturbed air behind the car, and that normally means by adding a long tail which narrows to a smaller cross-sectional area. So quite dramatic modifications, both of those. Don't underestimate the difficulty of fitting an under tray. Sounds easy until you've actually got to make mounts and a frame, and one of my cars runs a major rear under tray, a steel welded frame to fit it in. It's not something that you just get a few pot rivets and a sheet of old plastic and away you go. It just doesn't work that way in the real world. The other way of reducing aerodynamic drag is to reduce what's called the projected frontal area. So if you are standing on the road looking at your car aimed straight towards you and you're looking at a distance, what you can see of that car is what's called the projected frontal area. The total drag is found by multiplying the drag coefficient by the projected frontal area. So if you can reduce either of those, you'll reduce total drag. How can you reduce projected frontal area? You can delete the mirrors and fit TV cameras instead, if that's legal where you are. You can go to narrower tyres, again if you want the trade-off in terms of typically less grip, and you could lower the ride height, which means that you have less of the front tyres actually exposed. So there are three ways of reducing projected frontal area. Now, if you're on the highway a lot, and the higher the speeds you're travelling at, the more significant the result will be. An under tray would be the one that I would go for, and that at least isn't going to be hugely expensive and is achievable by a do-it-yourselfer with some careful work. Rolling resistance. If you reduce rolling resistance, your car will go further on the same amount of fuel. How do you do that? Higher tyre pressures. Now, one of the things I see is people using ludicrously high tyre pressures. If they ever had an accident, I think they could be criminally charged by the police. Running 50, 60 psi tyre pressures is just crazy stuff. But you can go up a little bit, go up 4 or 5 psi, and typically that doesn't make the car turn into a skatey mad thing, but it does improve rolling resistance by lowering it. Or you can go for specific tyre designs that were actually made for low rolling resistance. You can combine both of those things. The big one's driving style. This doesn't need to cost you a thing. You don't need all this technical knowledge, you don't need to make any modifications, you just change the way that you drive. For example, if you have a manual transmission car, getting into the highest gear as early as you can. So you have higher throttle openings, which means there's less pumping losses, which means that by the time you get up to your chosen speed, you'll have used less fuel getting there. Yes, changing gear early and using large throttle openings, but if you can help it, not quite full throttle, where full throttle in many older cars actually starts to enrich the mixtures. Pulse and glide, where you use large throttle openings, get up to speed, back right off to 0, slow down slightly, go back to full or nearly full throttle. Now, I never drive this way, but technically it is actually able to reduce your fuel consumption because the engine is spending more time in its more efficient area of large throttle openings. And reading of conditions. If you ever are coming up to a traffic light and it's red and you can see it in the distance as red and you go straight from the accelerator to the brake, then you haven't been reading far enough ahead. You should always be able to lift off the throttle and roll for quite a long time before you have to brake. Things of that sort. Driving style makes a huge difference to fuel economy, especially in urban conditions. The books I've written, Modifying the Aerodynamics of Your Road Car, and I do cover things like under trays in that book, setting up a home car workshop, and optimizing car performance modifications. If you're still with me, and I reckon 99% of you will now be gone, none of it is easy except maybe an exhaust and maybe an under tray, a belly pan, and definitely changing driving style. And all the rest, the hydrogen additions and the plasma ignitions and all this other crap that people keep spouting about, forget them. Do something that's actually going to work. Thank you.